Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Johan van Kuyk and I'm the Director of Product at Infotools. Our platform, Harmoni, has been enabling researchers to get to their data insight faster for a number of years with easy to use, intuitive data exploration capabilities, including crosstabs, auto-sig testing, low sample indicators, and a number of calculation displays that can be analysed in a table or in chart form. While the power of this flexibility is heavily utilised, we have heard loud and clear from our customers that time still remains a precious commodity. It's imperative that we leverage technology to make the path to this insight as fast and as easy as possible. Our almost 30 years in the industry has seen us exposed to a wide variety of data type and scenarios, and this has equipped us with a solid foundation from which to build some innovation on. Our latest journey in this area has seen us leverage the latest in statistical testing, including Bayesian, and comparison methodologies to develop a smart analysis tool that we have called Discover. Discover supports the researcher to get to the insight faster by automatically bringing the most interesting insight to the surface, focusing your attention to the results in the data that indicate the most or least probability in the target groups that we call descriptors. And when compared to a similar topic area, for example, brands, then similarity across these is also automatically visualized. Color and order are key to Discover's power. We use both of these to clearly and quickly show this probability and similarity in tabular or visual forms. Instant profiling of your topic area, again, for example, brand against target groups, are generated on the fly. Then simply add more brands to compare, and the similarity across these are automatically visualized also. While giving researchers powerful pathways to areas for further deep dive, a familiar drag and drop interface also allows a wide range of people to get immediate benefit from its use. Harmoni's clever sharing and export tools also mean that discovered results can be part of a collaboration on analysis or form part of reporting. I will now hand over to Geoff Lowe, who will take us through Discover in action.
Thanks, Johan. I'm Geoff Lowe. I'm a partner here at Infotools and also head of sales. So I'm going to do a demonstration of the Harmoni platform and focus in particular on the Discover functionality that Johan mentioned and show how it joins the machine to the human to make everything a lot more efficient. To show you that, I'm going to use the New Zealand International Visitor Survey. This is real data, so it will have meaning, and the analysis I'm doing is a real analysis. So one of the things that we might want to ask is, what can we find out from this data about visitors to New Zealand from all of the different markets? And I'm going to focus initially on the top 10 markets. And so I'm going to drag the top 10 markets across to my analysis pane. And I'm going to choose a few demographics so that we can do a classical crosstab analysis to see a demographic profile of visitors to New Zealand from these markets. I'll let age, gender and household type, and I'll also bring in travel style as well to bring a bit of variety into it. And you can see that gives us the 4 separate crosstabs. If I scroll down, you can see we've got travel style there at the bottom. And with each of those crosstabs, we can see from the data which countries are skewed towards younger age groups, more male and female, different household types, etc. There's a few visual aids that we can add to make it easier to see those patterns. For example, I can apply a heat map to this table, and the heat map draws our eyes to where the big differences are, which makes it a lot easier to see the pattern. So, for example, visitors from Germany are more likely than all other visitors to be in those younger age groups, and visitors from the United States, you can see, are more likely to be in the older age groups. And we can see similar patterns across the other demographic variables. We can augment that colouring with some significance difference testing. So putting SIGDIF on applies a chi-square test, classical statistical test so that we can confirm whether or not the patterns we're seeing with the heat map are statistically significant. And in fact, those two patterns that we saw immediately, the younger German visitors and the older US visitors, are indeed significant at the 95% confidence limit. There's one further step that we can take to make it easier for us to see these patterns and to differentiate between the visitors from different countries. And that's this. I can separate these tables into separate tables and look at them one at a time. I'll just turn the heat map off. We don't need that anymore. But what we do need is a stacked bar chart. So if I put this into a stacked bar chart, we can immediately see, I think, even easier than in the heat map table, where the differences between the countries are. So we can see here, for example, visitors from Germany are very much more likely to be in these two younger age groups, and once again, the visitors from the US, along with those from the UK, more likely than all other groups to be in the highest age group. And we can go further and say, well, let's have a look at that gender profile. And we can see again there are some differences. One country's visitor stands out, and that is visitors from India, much more likely than average to be male. And travel style, again, big differences. The one that really stands out there is visitors from Korea, South Korea that is, much more likely than average to be arriving here on a tour as opposed to travelling independently. So we can find out a lot about visitors to New Zealand from all of these markets by running table after table and looking at them one at a time. But in order to get a really full picture of visitors from each of these countries, we're going to have to run a lot of tables and look at a lot of charts. There is a better way, and Johan mentioned it. He talked about the Discover functionality in Harmony, and that's what we're going to turn to now so that we can answer the bigger question: what is everything this data can tell us about visitors from these countries? I'll go back to my tree view, I'll clear my analysis pane, and we'll do that analysis again. I'm going to start off by asking the question, since we looked at visitors from the United States and we saw that they are indeed older than average visitors to New Zealand, let's start with asking the question, what can we discover about visitors from the United States to New Zealand? I'm going to drop the US visitors into the Discover panel on the analysis pane, and it gives us this analysis. So you'll see that there is a single column. Well, it's multiple columns of numbers, but they all represent visitors from the United States. And all of the items from all of the variables that have been predetermined in this project have been ranked so that the ones at the top are the ones that most positively differentiate US visitors from all other visitors. This is applying a Bayesian statistical test as opposed to the chi-square test that we saw in the standard table earlier. And what that really means is that the items that have the highest probability of the United States visitors being this item as opposed to compared to everybody else, those highest probability items are at the top. So visitors from the US are more likely than all other visitors to care about our wildlife, native birds in particular. Remember, we know that they are older than average, but what we didn't know looking at that one table was all these other things that differentiate US visitors from all other visitors. In fact, we have to scroll all the way down to here to see that that older age group, in fact, does positively differentiate visitors from the US. But we now know an awful lot more about them, the things that they do when they're here, how long that they stay, where they arrive in the country. All of these things are now known to us with a single drag and drop. In fact, if I scroll right to the bottom of this table, you can see that the green arrows make way to red. And these are the items now with the lowest probability that visitors from the US are higher than visitors from elsewhere. So in other words, what that really means is that visitors from the US are less likely than average to visit a theme park or a leisure park in New Zealand. They're less likely than other visitors to be visiting friends or staying with friends, which kind of makes sense. They've come a long way, less likely to have family here. So having created a really easy profile of visitors from the US, the next obvious question is, well, how do visitors from the US compare with visitors from the other top 10 markets? And I can do that really easily in Discover by choosing the countries that I want, dragging them across, adding them to the table. And adding them means that we retain the US as our target, but it adds all of the other countries into the across part of the table, and it ranks them so that the country that has the most similar profile to those visitors from the US is right next door to it. The next most similar is next to that, and so on. So we can see visitors from Canada have the most similar profile, activity, demographic, and otherwise profile to visitors from the US, which kind of makes sense. They are geographically co-located, so you'd expect that. Not quite so intuitively, visitors from China are the next most similar, and you can see there's a lot of similarity there, some differences, but a lot of similarity. In the tables, we saw that visitors from Germany were younger than visitors from other countries. So if we want to focus in on Germany, we can now. All we need to do is highlight Germany, choose that to be our target. It becomes the focus of the table, so Germany is our first column, and we now see the countries that are most similar in terms of visitor profile to Germany. In fact, again, sort of co-located, the visitors from the UK are the most similar, not identical. They certainly are different to German visitors in terms of age. And in fact, that age variable that we saw in the table is the one that most differentiates German visitors. So it really is important. It's something that we now have confirmed. But we also see all the other things that differentiate German visitors from the other countries. One thing that you may have noticed is that no matter who we make our target in this table, it is visitors from Australia that are always the least similar. And if I make them the target, we can start to get an idea of why that is. Geographically, obviously, Australia is closest to New Zealand, and so it makes sense that visitors from Australia are going to be different from visitors from pretty much anywhere else. You can see here that Australian visitors are more likely to be staying with family, more likely to be travelling independent, have an arrival point which isn't Auckland, the main arrival point. So again, really easy to see, profile of Australian visitors, and even though Singapore is the most similar, we can see that they are still quite different, just reinforcing that idea that Australian visitors really are different, unique in terms of our tourism industry. Now, having focused on that, there's one more thing that I want to do just to complete the story. So Discover, hopefully you've seen, makes it really easy with a few simple drag and drops to profile any group that you're interested in. It might be a brand group, in this case it's a group of visitors, and then to compare that group with all other groups that you care about. What I want to do now is visualize this. We've been playing with some different ways of visualizing this data to make this table even easier to visualize. And if I do the special bubble chart, this is focusing just on Australia because they are our target. We've kind of put all the other countries aside. And we've developed this bubble chart so that each bubble represents an item down the table. And if that item happens to positively differentiate our target group, Australia visitors in this case, it is green. If it negatively differentiates based on that Bayesian probability statistic, then it is red. The size of the bubble represents the size of the group. So we can see, for example, that visitors from Australia, this tends not to be their first visit. Still, 76% of Australian visitors say this is not their first visit, and that is a lot higher than it is for all other visitors. They're also slightly more likely to be male, which could be because there's a lot of business travel to New Zealand from Australia. They're also more likely than all other visitors to be travelling independently. On the other hand, they tend not to be travelling with one or more others, which kind of matches the independent. They tend not to have arrived in Auckland, which we saw from the table. And of course, if they're more likely to be male, they're less likely to be female. One thing that interests me is that they're less likely than other visitors from other countries to visit our beaches, which if you understand Australian beaches, you can understand why. I want you to hold that thought because we're going to drill into that now. By doing another analysis. So let's just go back to our tree view. I'll clear the analysis pane. And I want to find out, in terms of the things that people do when they're here, what differentiates folks from Australia with folks, visitors from other countries. And to do that, I'm going to drag Australia, the top 10 markets, into the cross part of my analysis pane. I'm going to find, using the search function, I'm going to find activities undertaken in New Zealand as a variable, and I'm going to choose almost all of them, from beach down to visiting flower shows. I'm not going to choose none of these because I'm not interested in that group. Drag that into the down part of the table, and you can see that visitors from Australia are less likely than all other visitors to do all of these things. We know that there are other things that they do, visiting friends, etc. Now, I'm just going to flip this table over, put the countries down, because I want to focus just in on Australia and show a different kind of visualization that helps us understand these visitors even better. I'm going to try a space graph. Now, this space graph is rendered in 3 dimensions. It's based on a correspondence analysis. I won't go into the details of how that's calculated. You can look that up. But for those of you who are familiar with correspondence analysis, let me just point out that the 3 dimensions that we are rendering here explain a total of 89% of the variation between the items in these 2 variables. So these 3 dimensions is a really good view of what differentiates visitors from each country across these activities. And you can see here, well, I've left just Australia in for the time being, and you can see that Australia, even though Australians are less likely than everybody else to do these things, to the extent they do them, it is visiting our beaches, going to our national parks, and other natural attractions that they do. Now, that is an insight that you may not have seen if you relied just on the table. Now, one other thing I'll point out here is if I add in the other markets simply by selecting all from my select list, and I'll rotate this around again to make it easier to see. One other insight here is visitors to New Zealand from China are kind of out on their own. They, like Australia, have a kind of a unique profile, and in terms of activities they undertake, more than average, more than the other visitors, is visiting those flower shows and also visiting theme and leisure parks. In fact, you can see the extreme position of theme and leisure parks indicates that the people from China really are positively skewed towards that activity. So that's, I'll wrap it up there. Hopefully you've seen how easy it is to see the patterns in the relationships, to find out what's driving differences between visitors or any group you like, using the Discover tool in Harmony, and then to flesh that out with the special bubble chart visualization, and in this case, what we call the 3D space graph, the correspondence map. So that is a summary of Discover and some other investigative capabilities of the Harmony platform. I'm now going to hand back to Sue and open it up to questions from the audience.